Hello everyone. As promised, today we're going to start on part 2 of our video, which is going to integrate ChatGPT functionality into our script. Our objectives for this video are the following. We're going to add an option to the menu for ChatGPT. We're going to create a loop for our conversation. I'll go into that a little bit later as to why we're creating a loop as opposed to just doing a one-off. We're going to create an array for our conversation entries. We're going to format the JSON payload. It's going to go to the API in step 5, and we're also going to output the returned message from that API call. And finally, we're going to demonstrate a conversation using our script. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, bringing up my code here. This is the same script as we had before from part number 1. Let's go ahead and start making our edits. The first thing we're going to do is come up here. We're going to make some changes to our menu since we're going to add an additional option. We're going to go ahead and add it here. I'm going to say option number 2. That's going to be chat GPT conversation. All right. Now quit is going to have to change to number 3. We're going to have to come down here and say, instead of enter a choice between 1 or 2, we're going to say 1 through 3. All right. One thing we didn't do was create a catch-all in our previous script. So we're going to do that right now. We're going to say entry. All right. So we really have 3 different valid options. It's either going to be 1, 2, or 3. Now, if the person doesn't put in 1, 2, or 3, then what we're going to do is loop back around. We're going to tell them, please input a valid entry. And then they're going to get the menu again after a pause. So we're going to say write host. And we're going to say invalid entry. Please input a valid option. All right. And we can go ahead and make the foreground color on this one. Let's just make that red because it's kind of like an error. All right. So there we go with this. Now let's go ahead down here to our conditions. So we have else if, and then we have our final else statement. All right. I'm going to duplicate this else if. So we're going to say, all right, this was our previous quit command. So we're going to change that to 3 because now 3 is going to be quit. And now our new 2 is going to be our ChatGPT conversation. Now, when we're creating this one, what we have to do is create an array for our conversation. And that's because the difference between the regular DaVinci API calls and ChatGPT is that ChatGPT, on top of being a little bit more intelligent in terms of AI, it's also going to have context to the API calls that you send it, or to the conversation. We're going to have to supply that context. So that means that whenever we send out a message, we're going to supply the previous message history so that it understands what was said back and forth. If you did not provide this, then you would end up with a situation where you can send it an API call and it may reply back to you, but it's only going to have context from just that message you sent it. If there was anything said prior to that, then it's going to have no idea. It's going to have no idea, what was said prior, and that's not going to be a good experience. So we're going to make sure that we give it the chat history. And in order to do that, we're going to create a variable here. We can call it conversation_hist. All right. And this is going to be an empty array for right now. So it's going to be @ open close parentheses. All right. Something else we're going to do here, we are going to have a loop. So let's say let's say we'll call it chat. Let's call it chat equals $true. All right. That's going to be our main loop for this particular condition so that we can keep going back and forth in our conversation. All right. So go ahead and have our while loop, and we're going to say while $chat. All right. Now we have our while loop. And the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to ask the person to go ahead and make an entry. So we're going to say read. 1 second here. Read host. So we're going to take the person's message. We're going to type that into a variable. Let's just call that message. So $message equals read host. And we're going to say, please type your message. We're also going to have to give the person an out. Otherwise, we'd have an endless loop. We're saying while true, and we have no way to break out of this loop. So we're going to go ahead and say, type your message. And then in parentheses, we're going to say to exit type out GPT. Of course, you can put anything for this part. I'm just saying out GPT because typically a person wouldn't type that. So you want it to be something that a person wouldn't typically say in a regular conversation. All right, so we gather our message. We're going to come down here and we're going to do a quick if statement. So we're going to say if $message equals -eq out GPT, then we are going to set $chat to false. All right. Pretty simple. All right, and then we're going to say else. All right, so if the person's not trying to exit, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to carry out some options here, or some things here. Now, this is where we start to go into our API call, and there's a little bit of background that has to be discussed here before we go into this API call. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the documentation for OpenAI. All right. This is the documentation from OpenAI.com. If you have your account, which you should, you need an account to have your token for your API calls. You would be able to go to the API reference section. And from here, we're going to look at create chat completion. This is different from the regular completions, which would be DaVinci model and things like that. Chat completions, the API calls look a little bit different. So firstly, we can see here that we're going to be hitting this API endpoint, and our method is going to be post. So we're going to be posting information to this API endpoint. Now, if we look down and we look at our request body, we see what our requirements are. The model is going to be required. I think right now we're at ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, I believe, is the current model that's available. Messages. Oh yeah, by the way, the model is going to go in as a string. We're going to have our messages, which we'll dive into this a little bit later, because messages are going to go in as an array. This is why I said we had to have an array in our PowerShell script, is because our messages are going to go in, and they're going to go in as one of three different roles. It's either going to go in as system, it's going to go in as user, or you're going to go in as an assistant. Okay, so if a message goes in as system, the way I typically use this is if you have certain guidelines that you want ChatGPT to adhere to. For example, you'll notice that there's certain prompts online that people use. Typically, I would put the prompt in a system at the very beginning and say, okay, well, you are to behave as, like, say, for example, IT recruiter, cybersecurity recruiter, or whatever the case is, and have it stay in a certain role or a certain persona, which can be kind of useful to you if you want to act like, say, for example, a comedian. You could do that too. I typically use system for those. User is just going to be the messages that go in as yourself or whoever's using the script. So the person, and then assistant is going to be the messages that were replied by the API. So most of your messages are going to be user and assistant. Now going down to content, once again, this is going to be the actual content of the message. So you're going to have a key value pair for the role, who the role is, and then you're going to have a key value pair for the content and the actual message itself. These are the only three requirements here. I mean, not three requirements. We have one in our messages. There's some other optionals here, but we're not going to really touch these at the moment. Temperature, top P, all of those. We're not going to touch those. Really, we only have two requirements. If we look at it, we need the model, we need a message, or messages, plural. Those messages are going to be an array of roles and content. And optionally, you can add a name, but we're not going to do that for this one. We're going to keep this fairly short and simple. So this is very important because this is what we're going to be creating. All right. So let's go back to our script and let's look at what we're going to do here. So we have our message that was given to us above. This message is going to go into our array that we declared up above, our conversation history. We're going to use that conversation history. Like I said, it is an array, and we're going to take our key value pairs. So as we just read, when we create our messages, we're going to need two different pieces of information. We're going to need the role, and we're going to need the content itself. It's going to look something like this. All right. So what we are going to do in this case is we're going to take our role, which is going to be user. All right. And we're going to take our content, which is going to be our message. I just pasted this from a previous script that I created for this. Message. All right. We're going to say that conversation history plus equals, and then this is our index here. Like I said, curly brackets, role in quotation marks equals user, and content equals our message. All right. This is how we're going to establish our message history. So the first thing we're going to do is add that to our conversation history as a user. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start to craft our API call. Now, for our API call, we are going to need a body. We already have our header above. Our header in this case is very simple. It just has, remember, your authorization token, content type. So in this case, we're going to come back here and we're going to have our body. Now our body is going to contain what model we're using. And as I mentioned before, I'm kind of copying and pasting some of this from a previous script just for the sake of time. Remember that our model, like I said, is GPT 3.5 Turbo. All right, now messages, this is going to be our conversation history. All right, For max tokens, we really don't have to have that. That's an optional setting. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out. Remember, the only two requirements are our model and our messages. And under the messages, you need to make sure that you always include a role and content. Optionally, you could also put a name here. But this is what we're working with. All right, so now we have our body and we have our message. The only thing that's left to do is to go ahead and to really just execute the API call. So let's go ahead and let's look at what we're going to do here. We have our URI, which is going to be our API endpoint. We have our header, which matches up here, $header, $header. And then we have our body from right here. Now we are going to convert this to JSON, and I will show you how that looks in a moment here. But all right, remember that we're doing a post method, and let me go ahead and pull up the API endpoint that we're using for this, which is chat completions. So URI is going to be API openai.com v1 chat completions. That's what we have. So we're going to supply our header, we're going to supply our body as a JSON. And that's what we're going to do. So if we go ahead and execute this as it currently stands, this will run. This will run. Let me make sure that we're not missing anything here, because what I'm looking at is, looks like we're missing a square bracket. So we have, let's see, this. Oh, that's what's going on. All right, so we have our while loop. Okay, while. And then we have our condition. All right, that's it for that. Then we have this condition. Then we have right host. Forgot to put a curly bracket on the end. There we go. Okay, so if we were to run this one as it currently stands, this would run, and what it would also give us is our information back. Right now, I'm just going to go ahead and let's say that we're going to store the output of this API call into a variable called data. Data equals this. All right. So we're going to run this API call, and we're going to store that output into a variable called data. All right, so we get our menu here, which we are expecting. I'm going to say option number 2. Type your message. To exit, type out GPT. Hello, is this chat GPT? Question mark. Okay, now it looped as we expected for it to do, because we did not type out GPT. Since the logic is incomplete, we did not see our reply. We're going to fix that. I'm going to Control C to get out. I'm going to type $data. All right, now diving in, what we're going to see here is the JSON reply that we got back. We have our object, which is chat completion. We have created. It gives us a little bit of data here. Let's go ahead and let's dive into choices. So I'm going to say data.choices. Okay. Now, if we go under choices, we're going to see that it does reply a message here. The role of that message is assistant. The content says, yes, this is ChatGPT. How may I assist you today? All right. Finish reason is stop. There's a little bit of a backstory on why that's important. You can use the API in a few different ways. Some is that it can, or one way is that it can return chunks of data, or you can return the entire message, which is what happened here. So finish reason, stop, that's perfectly fine. An index, we can have multiple replies. We can have it reply in a few different variations, but we're not doing that. We're just gonna reply with one. And so our index is 0. So let's go ahead, let's do a little bit of work here with our JSON. We're gonna say choices, and then we're gonna select, let's say bracket 0. All right. This is still gonna keep us where we are on this message, and that's fine. Hold on, so we don't need 0. Let's go ahead and look at our message. All right, now when we do that, we have our two different portions of data. We have our role and we have our content. So let's go ahead and drill down and say content, and we have the actual message. This is ChatGPT. How may I assist you today? This is really cool, all right, because now we have what we need to type in to get the reply message. So I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to add a new line. So we have our data. We're going to say $reply equals this, which is data.choices.message.content. That's what we used in the console to see what our reply was. Now we're going to need to do two different things. We're going to need to output this reply, and we're also going to need to add it to our message history, or our conversation history, because remember, the only way that ChatGPT knows what the conversation was prior to the API call is by you supplying that context to it. All right. So we're going to have to do this one again. I'm just going to copy it and paste it down below. This time, though, we're going to add on another one, and we're going to say assistant. Okay. Because it does reply as assistant, as we saw here. Role equals assistant. All right. And we're going to also take the reply and make that the content. To be honest, we could probably just take message, because it's almost word for word exactly, or character for character exactly what's happening here under message. We could technically take this and then just say that plus equals conversation history. So that way you could just append that on. I'm just creating it here for a little bit of visual so you guys can see it. So we start off with our message that we send it. Then when we go down below, we see the reply. We get that reply. We add it to our conversation history. Okay, so now when we do additional API calls, it's going to be aware of our initial message and the message that it sent back. It's very important to have a coherent conversation. All right. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a write host, because we need to show what our reply was. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the foreground color on this yellow just to make it distinct. And we're going to say chat GPT : $reply. So that's our reply variable that we declared up here. And that gives us a reply. So after this point, we would loop back. We would get our reply, we would loop back, and it would prompt us for another message, okay? Just like how it did up here. We have type your message. If it's not out GPT, then we are going to continue. We're going to continue going. So it's, it's pretty neat. So let's go ahead and let's run our script again. This time we will see the reply and it will loop. And ultimately we should be just about done with this. Let's go ahead and let's go okay. All right. So now we're going to do a number 2, and we'll say, am I speaking to ChatGPT? Question mark. Okay, so now if we look back, we'll see that ChatGPT, yes, you are speaking to ChatGPT. How may I assist you today? Okay, can you give me today's date? Now, it's always going to fail this because the data that, at least as it currently stands with ChatGPT, the most recent data that was put into this, I think, was in 2020. So if we ask it this question, we're not going to get a good reply. And in fact, this is pretty funny because it says, yes, today's date is bracket date. It didn't even try to put in a date. That is a funny reply. Try again. Okay. As an AI language model, I do not have real-time clock and cannot give you the current date without being connected to a computer system or device. Could I assist you with anything else? All right. Now, what I want to demonstrate here very quickly is this is why we needed to supply it with our previous message history, because look at this message, try again. If we didn't give it a message history, it wouldn't know what I meant when I said try again. So this is why ChatGPT is a little bit more powerful than DaVinci. It can use that context, and it can carry on a conversation based on these messages, things like that. It's actually pretty neat. So now let's go ahead and exit. I'm going to type in out GPT. Okay, we exited our loop. Press enter to continue. All right, and it takes us back to our main menu. From here, I'm going to say number 3 to quit, and we're out. All right, so see, this is pretty much our script. It works very well. As you can see, we were able to communicate with ChatGPT. Now, what I would like to do too here, and I'm going to see if it's still going to allow me to do this since we did exit. Let's see if we can pull up our conversation history. Okay, this is good. So if we pull up conversation history, I just want to show you all, these are the key value pairs that ChatGPT was aware of. We can look here, we see name, we see value, we see content. Am I speaking to ChatGPT? The role. And you can see the progression of our conversation here. Now, if I were to go through and if I say bracket 0, which would give us the first one, see it does keep these in a sequential form, in a sequential order here. So it's going to know what the first message was, what the second message was, so on and so forth. There's also a caveat to this. It's important to note that the maximum number of tokens that ChatGPT can process currently for this model, once again, this model that we're using right now is going to be GPT 3.5 Turbo. It can only handle, I think it's 4,096 tokens. That's important because when you're supplying this additional context, when this goes above that 4,096 token limit, then it's gonna crash. Like, it's not gonna take that. So that means, as a good sort of housekeeping or hygiene within your script, what you could do is save only the last, like, say 8 to 10 messages. That's not tough to do. I'll give you a good example. Let's say that we want to pull the last 2 messages, or last 2 in this array. All right, so we have these 2. You don't have to know how long the array is. I can say -2 ... -1. Okay, so when we look at this, what we're going to see is that we have this message, try again, and we have the very last message. I apologize as a language model, blah, blah, blah. When you use negative numbers, what you're really doing is counting from the end back into it, which is very useful because, like I said, we don't have to know how many messages there are. We just have to know, okay, I'm only going to get those last two. You could go so far as to say negative, like let's say -3. Oops. So let's say we're doing -3 to the last one. So that would be the last 3 messages. And this is important because what you could really do is you could say conversation history equals, and then you could tell it, you know, conversation underscore history equals just these last 3 messages. And then that way you can sort of go through and you can keep the conversation history in an orderly or sort of manageable length. So you're not going to exceed that 4,000 token limit for the API. So there are ways of getting around it. But once again, let's just go ahead. Let's just go back through this script again. It does work. Very cool. Very neat. And we were able to do it really without the white space. I'm sure we did this in under 90 lines of code for sure. And I'm sure that there are other things in here that could be optimized to make it even less than that. Once again, I'm going to run the script. ChatGPT conversation. Hello, ChatGPT. How are you? And we have to wait for the API call to complete, and then it comes back and gives us our message in yellow. I don't have emotions in the human sense, but I am functioning well. Good to know. All right, let's exit our script and press number 3. You do see this little bug here, and I want to say this may have to do with either the scripting engine, or it may have to do with the version of PowerShell. I'm not certain why that happens, but not a big deal. First 2 characters are white and the remainder are yellow. Strange glitches and bugs within PowerShell. All right, and we exit and we're finished. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Once again, you know, if you all have any questions or comments, feel free to post those in the comments below, and I'll make sure that I reply and everything as quickly as I can. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.